Hey there, welcome to Everyday Biology. Today we're going to look at how to use a spectrophotometer. Now a spectrophotometer is an instrument used to measure either transmittance or absorbance of light. We are going to use it to measure absorbance of light. And when we talk about absorbance of light through this machine, what we're really talking about is how much light is going to pass through a solution or a suspension of different specimens or different concentrations. We're going to basically measure how much light is capable of moving through it and then comparing different concentrations based on these absorbance values. In order to get this to work correctly, here we have our spectrophotometer here, and I've set up a couple of different samples. We have first just plain old water. This is what we refer to as a blank. We have to make sure that we compensate for the water that's in the test tube itself as well as the test tube. I then have my first concentration of a colored solution, just added some dye to some water. Then I have a second concentration, and I have a third concentration. Now, looking at these three different concentrations, if we put some white behind it might make a little more sense. You can see there are, of course, different colors and different intensities of blue. We can measure that and say on a scale of 1 to 10, the first tube is a 10, the second tube is a 5, and the third tube is a 2. We would be qualifying that, and this is known as qualitative data, where we don't have an exact measurement, we're just kind of taking a look at it and making a guess. We're scoring it or grading it. If we want quantitative data, then we're going to have to use some type of instrumentation to actually measure the concentration of each dye in each sample. So for quantitative measurement, we are going to use the spectrophotometer. And again, the spectrophotometer measures absorbance. How do we use the spec? Well, the first thing we have to do is, of course, turn it on, which I've already done. It's plugged in and turned on. The wavelength of light that we're going to measure with has already been set. For this particular experiment, I'm going to measure absorbance using a light wavelength of 546 nanometers. At that wavelength, that will already be set for you, by the way. You don't have to worry about that. Your instructor will set that for you. The only thing that you're going to have to do is measure the blank. So you have to set the blank or tear the spec. We call it a spec 20. And then you're going to take your measurements. Okay, before we get started taking measurements, we first have to set the blank. We're going to use some tissue paper here. We want to make sure that the test tubes themselves don't have any fingerprints or marks on the outside. So we're going to hold the test tube at the very top. You want no writing or tape or anything on the test tube. It needs to be nice and clean. We're going to take what's called a Kim wipe here, and we're going to just kind of wipe down the tube. Make sure there's no fingerprints, dust, dirt, anything like that that might interfere with the light. We then open this chamber right here, and we're going to put this round peg in a square hole. Push it down like that, and then close the door. Light is going to be passed through. It's going to shine through that test tube onto a sensor plate, and that sensor plate is going to give us a numerical reading. For this is the blank. We want to, it's kind of like tearing a balance. We want to take away any absorbance that might occur due to the water and due to the actual glass of the test tube itself. So we put in the water blank. Since all of these contain water, we're going to take the water out of the equation here. We put our water blank in, and we're going to press the button that says 0 ABS, 100% T. Just press that button, and your spectrophotometer will say setting blank. Once it's done setting the blank, it should say, give you the nanometer, and it'll say 0.000 absorbance. The rest is pretty easy. We then take out our blank. We're going to measure our first concentration here. I'm going to wipe down the tube, make sure there's no fingerprints, put the tube into the chamber, close the door, and wait for my numbers to settle down. In this case, My first sample has an absorbance reading of 0.262. I'm going to take this one out. I'm going to put the next one in. Again, wiping the tube down, make sure there's no fingerprints. Close the door and wait for my numbers to settle down. This one has an absorbance reading of 0.042. A little less light being absorbed. Take this one out, and then we're going to, of course, do our last one. On the last one, we wipe it down, put the tube in, close the door. This one has a reading of 0.007. Once you're done, make sure all of the tubes are removed. You don't want to leave any tubes in here. Close the door and make sure that you've recorded all of your numbers. That's it. That's using a spectrophotometer to measure absorbance to determine concentration differences.